Now, we all know at Bear fans just how big this 2020 season is. And we know it. It's either this team puts 2019 in the rearview mirror, bounces back, and the trajectory of the organization looks a little different and a little bit better going forward, or they don't take a step forward, they stay in the same place or even take a step back, and then you really have to wonder about the future trajectory of this organization and just what types of big changes you could potentially see coming up in the off season. Like, those are the stakes here. This is a critical year and a critical moment and a critical junction in the history of the Chicago Bears organization. That is not hyperbole to say that. That is a simple, fundamental fact. And it should not be dismissed. It should not be ignored. It should not be minimized. Like, the stakes are really, really, really big this year. And of course, when you're talking about a season with so much importance, leave it to the mediocrity of the midway that is the Chicago Bears to have such a fundamentally conflicted question at the most important position on the field, which is the quarterback position, of course. Trubisky, former number 2 overall pick. So far in 3 seasons, total bust. The organization didn't pick up his 5th-year option. He's in a contract year now, and he's fighting for his starting career in his football life. Ryan Pace's big move in the offseason, his big splash to address the quarterback position, was to let Chase Daniel go and to go trade for Nick Foles, who couldn't beat out Gardner Minshew, a former 6th-round pick in Jacksonville. 1 year after Jacksonville intentionally overpaid for him to make a statement that he was their starter. All the while giving up a 4th-round pick to get him, along with then having to tie themselves to Foles financially, both for a big number this year and additional guaranteed money in 2021. Like, this is it. This is the story of the Bears offseason. This is the story of Bears camp. If you were focused on anything else, it's not to say that nothing else matters, but admittedly, this is the only thing that really truly does matter. Is one of these guys going to actually step in and be able to lead this team as an effective NFL starting quarterback? Personally, have significant reservations about that happening with either one of the guys. But now we're getting close, a couple of weeks away from the start of the 2020 NFL regular season. And it's about high time that Nagy quickly makes a decision on who is going to be his week 1 starter. Like, even just the thought of having to pick between Trubisky and Foles makes me want to, Mr. Pukey. Like, when you're having to make those types of loser A versus loser B choices, you are not in a good place. Let's be clear here. But now brings the discussion and the debate about who should be the Bears' week 1 starter. On the one hand, you've got Trubisky, the former number 2 overall pick. Certainly, in an ideal world, you would want him to win the job because of competence, not because of Foles' incompetence. You would want Trubisky to show you something that defends why you ever took him number 2 overall ahead of Mahomes and Watson in that 2017 draft. Ideally, you want to be able to have him go to start the season to truly find out once and for all what he can do or not do, even though we should all already know by now. Like, in an ideal world, on the one hand, Trubisky should be the starter going in. Especially because when you look at it, Foles has experience coming off of the bench and backing up a young quarterback. He is much more familiar and much more comfortable and much more well-equipped in that type of role than a Trubisky would be. And what's not going to help is if you start the season with Foles and then he bombs and then you bring Trubisky in, then you've already planted in Trubisky's mind where his confidence is very fragile, evidently, as we've seen over the past couple of years already. Now you've already told him you're not good enough to be the number 1 guy. You're only getting it by circumstance. Go out there and get him, Tiger. Not exactly going to be a formula for success. So you look at it there and you say Trubisky needs to be the guy. But on the flip side, The reason you made the dumb decision to trade for Foles was because you already know Mitch isn't the guy. Why do we continue to hold out any hope whatsoever that a guy who in 3 years has shown you nothing to indicate that he could be any level of star quarterback in the National Football League? I don't know. It's kind of that delusion of Bears fandom. Like if you sit there and acknowledge the apparent obvious truth, it makes you a bad fan. No, it doesn't. It just makes you realistic and connected with reality. The reason you went out and got another quarterback was because Trubisky stinks. So why in the hell would you go trade for a guy, give up a mid-round pick, when you already had limited draft pick capital to begin with, then guarantee Foles' contract past 2020 to then still sit there and start Trubisky week one any damn ways? Like, what sense would that make? It makes none. Either way, you could look at this whole situation and you say, if Trubisky's the week one starter, then why is Ryan Pace still have a job? Because he traded for Nick Foles and the guy wasn't even good enough to beat Trubisky. Valid. If Foles beats Trubisky out, then you say, well, Trubisky wasn't even good enough to beat a mostly career backup in Nick Foles. Why does Ryan Pace still have a job? Also, a very valid point. But at the moment, what we're dealing with here is the 2020 season. And if you're trying to win the most games possible, do you really feel that much more confident that Trubisky is going to be able to do so when you have seen plenty of evidence to indicate he's not that dude? I mean, personally, I still think the whole deal for Foles was stupid. I don't see what the plan was. I don't see how this was the best decision they could have possibly made. I thought it was a loser move by a loser general manager, a loser organization. That's the type of thing that losers do. But let's say you trot out there, Nick Foles, like, if you don't, that's where I would really question things. You acquired him because he knows the playbook. Well, apparently he didn't know the playbook enough to beat out Trubisky? Like that, to me, would really raise red flags. Wouldn't it? You know, I don't even know. Like, there really isn't a winning option here. I guess I come back to kind of the old logic of, even though you didn't sit there and pick up Trubisky's fifth-year option, which would lead me to believe that Foles is the one they have financial commitments to outside of 2020, you would think you would want to find out what he could do first. Certainly a sensible thing to say there. On the flip side, you could say, if Foles isn't good enough to clearly beat out Trubisky, then when in doubt, play the young kid and see what the hell happens. That also certainly makes sense to me. I don't know if I have a clear-cut answer at this point on who should be the starter. Because I could certainly make arguments for and against both guys. You know, and even if you say, well, you let them compete for it in practice and you truly let that determine who takes the starting reins, I'm okay with that because at least there will be some element of earning it versus entitlement for Trubisky or Foles, for that matter. You know, whoever shows the best in practice is the guy that you go with. That simple. But if you expect me to say, let's say Trubisky wins the battle in camp, like, is that, did he really won the battle or just Foles lost it more? And if either one of those guys really looked all that good in camp, and this is practice, not a game, mind you, we talk about practice. If they're not wowing you in practice, how do you expect them to wow you in games? Ooh. Like, this has the makings of a really ugly, really bad situation for the Bears. Because even if Trubisky is the week one starter, now that he's got somebody that is much closer in terms of level of competition to him and a much bigger threat to usurping him for the starting job, now you're going to sit there and Trubisky, you're going to wonder, how's he going to play when he's under pressure? How's he going to play when his nuts are in the grinder? From what you've seen in a lot of cases, it hasn't gone well in his Chicago career. Why all of a sudden would that fundamentally change? Whereas if you go with Foles, again, I come back to, now Trubisky's already had it established. He couldn't even beat out Foles in training camp for the job that he's had most of the last 3 years. Like, what the hell does that make him? Like, I worry that there's going to be a yo-yo back and forth with this quarterback position, and it's going to be a huge mess. The reality is I just don't think it matters. I just don't know that it matters. I don't see where there is such a fundamental difference between the two guys to where you could expressly state one way or another that one is that much better than the other. And if that's the case, as much as I have Trubisky fatigue and I don't ever want to see him suit up and start another game for the Bears, if it's close, then you play the young kid and you deal with the stupidity of the decision for the Foles trade then. I mean, because if Foles can't come in and clearly look better than Trubisky in practice when he was supposed to be familiar with the playbook, the same guy that he last year got overpaid by intent purposefully by the Jaguars and then couldn't keep the job from Gardner Minshew once he came back from injury, like, it should be clear as day right now that Foles should be the guy. Which in itself, as I've mentioned, is not necessarily anything that should inspire confidence or any type of winning strategy. But that's what it should be. The fact that it's not means that we should just be seeing Trubisky as the week 1 starter and deal with all the crap that's going to come as a result. I mean, otherwise, what are we talking about here? It could potentially be an ugly year for the Bears. Not fun to think about, not fun to talk about. But let's not kid ourselves too much. The fact that they even have this discussion, you look at the two names involved, should tell you all you need to know about what your expectations should be in 2020.